Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this regular meeting of the Budget and Finance Committee for November 18th. I'm Paul Krikorian, Chair of the committee. I'm joined by Council members Bob Blumenfield, Mitch Englander, and Michael Bonin, and we're ready to begin. If anybody would like to offer comment, general public comment, or comment on any of our agenda items, please fill out one of the white comment cards in the back and bring it forward. We'll be taking public comment, general public comment, prior to the discussion of today's agenda items, so please bring them forward right away if you have them. And while we're waiting for any cards to be brought forward, colleagues, I would propose items 4 and 3, let me rephrase, 3 and 4 as potential consent candidates unless you have any questions or concerns. These are reports regarding the write-off of bad debt. Mr. Englander, would you?
I just had a quick question on 3.
On 3? Okay. Well, we'll hold that one then. Item 4, if there's no questions, we will deem that report approved on consent. Do you want to go ahead and go to 3 now so we can get that? Why don't we do that before we go into closed session then? Let's go to item number 3.
Item number 3 is the City Administrative Officer report relative to the annual review of the status of reserve fund loans and recommended loan write-offs.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, I'm May Yutan from the CAO. Did you want me to go through the report or would
No,
you
just Mr. Englander has a question.
A couple just quick questions on the police and fire departments. There was on the fire, there was a $1.25 million loan provided to LAFD at the end of the 11-12 for payroll, and the loan subsequently, according to the report, I believe, was repaid as part of the annual reversion worksheet. And so if that's the case, why would that be written off?
Sorry.
And it's the same on the police, on the $1.2 million for the police.
Okay, part of the you're asking is why would we have to write it off?
Correct. Why would it be classified as a write-off in that case?
Because it's on the city books is considered a loan. So even though they had enough funding, the money reverted back to the reserve fund. So they had to encumber the funds in order to pay off whatever was the expenditure. So if they didn't encumber the funds, then the reserve fund will have to front fund those expenditures. So in order for us to clear the books, the council has to approve a write-off.
Well, I understand, I'm sorry, that part of it, I just don't understand. It was actually paid back. So if it was paid back, is that correct? According to the reversion worksheet, those funds in those 2 particular departments were actually paid back. And so if it was paid back, don't we just note it that way instead of a write-off?
I don't believe it was paid back. They're just saying that there were enough transfers.
According to the report, it was paid back.
No, I think what it is departments have several accounts, and in some accounts they may end up with surpluses, in other accounts they may end up with deficits. When the year end closes, it doesn't. The other surpluses are transferred to the reserve fund, regardless of whether or not the department as a whole would have been balanced. And so, in this case, because it was, I believe, the salary accounts that required funding, yes, that's where the reserve fund loan kicks in effect, because the departments can't just transfer funds from one account to another. It requires council action for that to occur.
I believe that happened in the reversion worksheet, was it not?
No, the reversion worksheet just allows the department to say which expenditures it belongs to, whether it's a special fund or the general fund. So in here, in the case of like both the police department and the fire department, they have money in their different accounts, but unfortunately in their salary account, they didn't have enough money in there, and they weren't able to encumber it in time for the controller year-end deadline. So as a result, the money that were in the other accounts where the surpluses are, it reverted back to the reserve fund. Given that there were not enough money within the salary account
to pay for that. So it was a deadline issue.
There was a deadline issue in the controller.
I mean, they were paid back. It's going back into the reserve.
It went back to the reserve fund.
But because of the timeline.
Yes.
I got it. Okay, that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah. So if there's no other comments or questions, we should go ahead and approve the report without objection. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
No cards.
We have no general public comment cards. We're prepared now to go to item number 1 in closed session. Is there anybody wishing to offer comment on item number 1? Seeing none, comment on the closed session items is closed, and we will retire and be back shortly. we just came out of closed session, so do we need to report anything on that, or?
No.
Acknowledge that the committee did just come back from closed session pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9 to discuss item number 1. Item number 2.
Thank you. Before we go to item number 2, Mr. Blumenfield.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a note. My colleague Mitch Englander here, we represent the Valley. We wanted to recognize Samantha, Ricky, and Nikki, who are journalism students here from CSUN.
Excellent.
And so we represent the West Valley together, and we appreciate that you're here on assignment, and wanted to recognize you.
Absolutely, Matadors.
Go Matadors.
And CSUN's in my district, so yes.
And
Hey, thank you.
And for the sake of the record, 4 of the 5 members of this committee represent the Valley, so it's good to have
You're
you.
well represented.
Okay, that's fine. All right, so we're ready to go to item number 2, but before we do, I do have one general public comment card. We had already closed general public comment, but that's fine. So we'll do that now. So I'd like to call upon Mr. Paul Lewis.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Council members. Good afternoon. Customer-focused environment to taxpayers. Again, customer-focused environment to taxpayers. By custom and long-established practice, the Office of Finance has sent out the business license tax forms. As you know, it's an 8.5 by 11 multi-page document printed on white paper with green and black ink. This year they did not. We have a Public Works Department that knowingly violates the municipal code, breaking the law, and representatives of the City Attorney's Office appearing in court pretending to be attorneys when they are not. You can understand why I'm more than a little frustrated today as I appear before you to decry with disgust for the actions of the Department of Finance. This year, I received a penalty notice from the department after the March deadline. I wrote to the Office of Finance on May 2nd regarding the notice of delinquent taxes due and delivered the letter to the Office of the General Manager as well as the City Attorney. Mr. Clark and Mr. Sato, then with the City Attorney, acknowledged the heavy-handed tactics of the Finance Department illegally using the City Attorney's Office as a threat. However, neither Ms. Cristobal or anyone from her staff responded to my letter. Instead, I received another computer-generated notice dated 10/13/2013 stating that I owed $808. I made several calls to the city and was eventually put in touch with Mr. Deneau, who treated me like I was buying a car from a used car salesman, suggesting that I make an offer with something that he could take back to them. Unlike most of you, when the economy crashed in 2008, I took a 75% cut in income and dug into my savings and retirement to keep my home. The citizens of Los Angeles have not cut your salaries, even in the tough economic times, and did not make you cut into your retirement funds in order to pay your mortgage. My 2012 income was below the thresholds that would have triggered tax. Had I received the notice that was by custom and long-established practice mailed out every year, I would have filed. It's hard enough to scrape by to pay the bills without having to remember about one more bill having not arrived by mail. So when the business tax is due on February 28th, April 15th, July 4th, or November 18th, making no money in 2012 is making no money in 2012. I should not expect to pay 1 cent. I'm not alone. My bookkeeper had several clients who all received the same notice in April. Furthermore, she had 2 who had paid, one electronically and one by check. And when she called, the department had no record of either payment, even with their bank statements having cleared. On May 2nd, I saw over 24 people all paying their tax and penalties because they had not received the notice that by custom and long-established practice was normally sent to all businesses. If nothing more, it looks like the department sought to garner several $1 million in low-hanging fruit with fines and penalties on the backs of small business in Los Angeles who would have normally filed with her department if they had followed custom and long-established practice to send out the forms that business owners have come to expect.
Mr. Lewis, I'm afraid we're not going to have time to have you read all of that. I know that my office has been working with you to try to resolve this matter. We will continue to do so, and you're welcome to, of course, copy your written comments for all of the members as well, or we'd be happy to do that for you.
That was basically done, but yes.
Oh, you okay? Well, it looked like multiple pages. So
No, that's the stuff from Finance Department. No, it's just one last paragraph. It is very frustrating for business owners to be intimidated and treated like this, especially when she says on her website, customer-focused environment to taxpayers, and it's been anything but.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your time. Okay, that brings us then to item number 2.
Item number 2, continuing from October 28, 2013, Los Angeles Department of Transportation and Transportation Committee reports and a revised LADOT report relative to reimbursing 3 city transit contractors with Proposition A local return funds for an increase in operating costs resulting from a change in their city business tax classification.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Jim Lefton with the Department of Transportation. This is an item that a number of you have heard multiple times. It was actually approved by the Transportation Committee on June 26th of this year and forwarded to the City Council, and it was then referred back to Transportation Committee and then referred to Budget and Finance Committee meeting. I want to make sure you have the latest report. The Department prepared a revised report that's dated November 12, 2013. The revised report includes some minor modifications to the reimbursement amounts and some technical corrections to recommendation number 2, as well as some text in the body of the report. The Department coordinated with the Office of the City Attorney and the Office of Finance in the preparation of this report. Basically, I won't go through it in too much detail because a number of you have heard this already, but in a nutshell, our transit contractors have been self-reporting their business tax classifications using the same classification for over 20 years. Recently, the Office of Finance conducted an audit of our transit contractors and determined that the classification that they had been using as part of the self-reporting process was incorrect, and they should have been using a different classification. And that new classification resulted in a significant increase in their business tax liability. The Department is recommending that the city reimburse our contractors just for this increase in their business taxes during the audit period. Now that all the companies are aware of what the correct classification should be, our expectation is that they'll use this correct classification going forward, and we won't be coming back for reimbursement. But because this is a change in what has been happening for the last 20-plus years, we felt it was an appropriate thing to reimburse them for the increased amount. So that's what we're basically recommending as part of this report. We're recommending using Proposition A funds. The funds that were paid will be paid into the general fund as they typically are. What we're recommending is that we reimburse our contractors using Proposition A funds, so there'll be no impact on the general fund by doing this, by taking this action. And we also added in the report for recommendation number 1 that in order to get reimbursed, that each of the firms would need to sign a waiver and release form to be prepared by the city attorney's office so that they could take no additional legal action on this matter. We're able to answer any questions.
Thank you. Mr. Kretz.
So the money that we're paying them, is that for the whole 20 years, or does it go back based on the statute of limitations?
Just for the contracts that are in place during the audit period. Once those contracts expire, all new contracts they'd be expected to use the new classification. So it's basically primarily during the 3-year audit period. It doesn't go back beyond the 3-year audit period.
Thank you. Mr. Flanagan, you on this?
Actually, I had a couple questions for Office of Finance, if they're here. Hello.
Yes.
Thanks for coming back in. We've heard this in T committee before. I'm going to vote to approve the recommendation, but I'm not happy with the situation. What happened here is sort of we changed things mid-course for the contractors. Is there a way in the future when people are bidding for city contracts that we can verify or check their business tax classification during that process so that we don't have this situation again?
Ed Cabrera, Assistant Director, Office of Finance. We have had that discussion with the various parties in this particular situation. It is feasible, provided that there would be existing resources. This office does not have a significant handle on the number of contracts and RFPs that are let on whether it's a monthly basis or an annual basis. So certainly, if it was a manageable number of contracts, there is the ability to take a look and make a determination whether there's sufficient information to provide a finding as far as what a business's activity may be. But again, that would be limited in scope for multiple reasons. First of all, the business could have different activities. They could have different contracts besides the contract that they have with the city. There could also be different types of activities that particular business may have with different city agencies other than, for example, in this particular situation. But again, a lot of that back and forth and that analysis would have to be predicated on, does the Office of Finance have satisfactory resources, again, given the number of contracts that the city lets overall.
And why was it determined to do the audit at this point when they were in the middle of a contract as opposed to when the contract window had expired?
Well, the Office of Finance's charter mandate is to ensure that all tax revenue due to the city is identified and collected. So when we do conduct audits, it's solely within that scope as far as our audit function. We don't have the ability to, because of taxpayer confidentiality within the municipal code, to notify another city agency that a particular business is being audited. That would be a violation of their confidentiality. So whether another entity has a contract and with the city agency, we don't have the ability to factor that into the scope of our activity. Beyond that, in this particular situation, there was litigation with one of the vendors. So based on city attorney legal guidance, we did initiate audits of two of the other vendors. So in this specific instance, that activity was predicated based on legal guidance provided to us by the city attorney's office.
But how many tax classification audits do we do per year?
There are 9 fund classes. So that was collapsed based on prior business tax reform. So currently there are 9 fund classes. Within each fund class there may be several different types of activities, but overall there are 9 fund classes and 9 different tax rates.
But how many businesses get checked per year?
Oh, per year, we audit probably somewhere around maybe 5,000. We conduct about 5,000 audits on average, 5,000 to 6,000 on average per year, and we have over 460,000 registered businesses.
How do you pick them? Is it done randomly or something?
We have different analytical tools that we use. So we look at prior reportings. We try to identify which businesses may be reporting incorrectly, and sometimes there are recommendations for audits based on observations made out in the field by field employees, and sometimes we get referrals for different types of activities.
Okay.
Mr. Blumenfield.
Just so I understand the retroactive classification change, is that unusual or does it happen a lot?
That's normal practice for any taxing agency. When businesses come in to register, those businesses are registered and classified based on their self-reported activity and their self-reported description. We have over 35,000 businesses on an annual basis that either come in and start new or add new activities. So their classification and registration is based on the information that they provide to our public counter staff or our call center staff. The audit process essentially is looking at activity in a past sense. So it's a go-forward audit that we're looking at. We're looking at what has already occurred. So the retroactive reclassification is kind of a misnomer. It doesn't clearly present what actually occurs in an audit. Just as each of us is responsible for our personal income tax, when a taxing agency looks, they're looking at the past history. So when we issue an audit finding, it's to identify revenue that was due to be reported and paid to the city from past years.
That's a little different than I was initially understanding, because it's almost like there was a misclassification, and you spotted it, and then the liability, financial liability was there, not we changed the rules after the fact.
Correct. The rules were not changed. The classification for these particular vendors has been in existence. The common carrier bus classification, their classification was based on information they provided to our office.
Why isn't the burden then because they failed to understand the way the appropriate classification? Why is it then considered a fault of the city?
I will defer to the representative from Alley DOT. I believe he can speak to information in their contract and RFP.
The basis for the department's recommendation that we reimburse our contractors, as I mentioned earlier, is based on the fact that since we started operating contract transit service in 1985, our contractors have been reporting their business tax classification under the original classification, which is transporting persons for hire. And that had been taking place for over 20 years. So I think there was a general perception or understanding on the part of all of our contractors over that time that that was the appropriate classification, because they've been issued business tax certificates from the Office of Finance with that classification until the time that the audit took place, and the finding was that no, that's not the proper classification. It should be.
Because of customs and practices of prior years, you're basically taking the position that it was an understandable misunderstanding of the classification as opposed to something that they should have known.
Correct.
Okay. At least I understand that now. And then in terms of, are there other future potential liabilities out there? Do we know that this represents the sum total of those impacted, or do we have some open-ended liabilities?
These are all of the transit contractors that had contracts during that period. So any additional contractors that may come into play would be after the audit period and should already know the proper classifications, so we shouldn't have this problem again.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Englander?
A couple of things, unless you want to.
No.
A couple of things on, one, just overall on some of the audits for classifications that I've experienced dealing and working with some businesses in my district, is that oftentimes when things are audited and they're reclassified, some of those, and I'm not sure if this one is one of those or not, is a gray area where there's, and I can think of a couple that we worked with, and actually I think you guys were involved in those, and I got to compliment you on the time and resources you put into when there's questions from businesses on trying to work with them and actually send people out, inspectors, to visit if there's a gray area. But I won't say 9 times out of 10. I would say the 100% that I've dealt with it over the last 10 years, we always, if it's sort of in the middle on the classification or it's a gray area, we go for the higher classification or the more expensive classification. And if in that case there's a business that has been reporting under the lower classification, even in those gray areas, and I'm not sure if this falls into one of those or not, not only do we ding them with the higher classification, but because it might fall right in the middle, but we also then add the late fees and penalties as well, even though that was a good business and good standing paying for years. So that there's an issue on a broader scale. I think we've got to talk about and figure that process out. I'd like to get more of an understanding. I don't think it's what the city's necessarily doing right or wrong, or from a department perspective or the inspectors. I think I need to understand it better myself. So I'd love offline if maybe we can have a discussion and I can figure that out so I can help some other businesses, certainly in my district. As it pertains to this one, I know in First Transit's case, we offered, and the $750,000 payback was a tax credit that we gave them for future. Did we offer that to these in this case, rather than a reimbursement from any particular fund?
The First Transit case resulted from litigation that occurred after an audit. I will have to defer to city attorney. I believe there is a city attorney representative that can speak to the two existing vendors. I will also add, however, that there is pending litigation with the Veolia vendor.
Right, but they agreed to a tax credit.
That's correct.
Instead of
In First Transit, yes. Good afternoon, Beverly Cook, City Attorney's Office. There is one matter that's pending, and that involves Veolia Transportation. However, because the LADOT report had been released, they simply filed a complaint seeking refund of $500,000, which is what they paid, because they're waiting for this matter to be resolved. So they have no intention of, I believe, litigating this matter. They simply wanted to preserve their time frame to pay and seek a refund. And I believe that MV Transportation is still going through the administrative process. So they haven't reached the point where they can actually litigate.
Okay, so my question, though, is on this, rather than a reimbursement from any particular fund, Prop A or otherwise, and I want to just dive into that for 1 second, is on that, have we offered, instead of the reimbursement from Prop A to these vendors, have we offered a future tax credit instead?
We have not, because they haven't come to us with that issue. They intend to resolve it in a different manner with the settlement that's being proposed by LADOT. But if they came to us, certainly we would take a look at just how we had resolved the First Transit matter to resolve their matters as well. But one hasn't reached that point yet, and the other one is only paying a portion, and we're in litigation with them.
So the issue that I have with this, and the reason that if it's moved forward in its current form, which if that's what the committee wishes, then so be it. I'll simply vote no. But from my perspective, the revenue that was coming in was general fund revenue, but we're paying it back with Prop A funds. Now, while that, I'm not sure if we've explored whether we have that ability or not. I personally have an issue with that. And it says because it won't be an impact to the general fund, but then it would be an impact to Prop A, which is also running a structural deficit as far out as 2020 years, 2021. So in looking at that, and specifically the fact that those funds are depleting revenue streams as well, I don't support the idea of using general fund dollars. I would much rather see if they would be willing to apply the same method of a tax credit over future years rather than a reimbursement. But particularly even if they did, if they didn't want that, I don't support it out of Prop A.
So the issue, I think, is that had they been classified themselves in the proper classification and been paying at the higher rate, that money would have been paid out of Prop A because it's Prop A funds that's paying for these services under the contract.
That's correct. Right? I mean, for the last 20-plus years, they pay to the general fund, and we pay them through the hourly rate using Prop A. So we've been doing that for many, many years, using Prop A to cover the cost of the business taxes. And you're correct, if they had used the proper classification from the get-go, we would have already paid them. So this is really just adjusting for the fact that they were using the incorrect classification. If they were using the correct classification, we would have already paid them and would have no need to come to the committee with this report.
So it's somewhat distinguishable than an ordinary business out there who, is simply operating under the improper classification, in that we're the ones that are paying for their services and paying for it out of Prop A. This has been heard a number of times in T committee. This is the second time, I think, here. Are there any other questions or concerns, Mr. Kretz?
No.
Okay. Then I would just move approval of LADOT's recommendations for this reimbursement. And Mr. Englander, you're a no? Okay. Okay. So that recommendation passes the committee.
Would that be for the
4-1?
For the current DOT report, the most recent DOT report?
Yeah, I consider the most recent one to be the
November
one
12th
before
report.
us, so it would, I don't know if you need to state any of the technical issues that you mentioned, but I think they're before us.
And just
So
for clarification for the record, I don't oppose the reimbursement if they were paying in the wrong classification. I do oppose what appears to be not business-friendly as a retro tax increase, retroactive instead of prospective tax increase, but more importantly, where the funds were coming from for the payment, just for the record.
Okay. Thank you very much. All right, that brings us then to item number 5.
Yes.
Item number 5 is a motion, Bloomfield Buscaino, relative to a development fee subsidy for the City of Calabasas for the Mulholland Highway project.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Mike Cantor, Deputy City Engineer with the Bureau of Engineering. This motion was brought forth related to fees for plan checking for permit work, and it's a little bit unusual in that the City of Calabasas is doing a betterment. Roughly about $200,000 of their $1.5 million project is improving the City of Los Angeles, and it's approximately at Mulholland Highway and Mulholland Drive. And this is also related to the development fee subsidy policy. And I believe there's a couple of points that I would like to make, and then I'd be happy to answer any questions you have. I was around when the policy was developed, and I believe the intent of the policy was to focus on private for-profit development and fees that were waived, which are essentially city staff salaries and permit fees and charges. I think that this may not be something that relates to what the intent of that policy was. And I think it would be worthwhile for the city attorney to just take a look at what this project is, take a look at the policy, and then provide a recommendation back before we spend a lot of time, on how do we relate it to the policy. And then with that, I think we proceed, based on however that recommendation comes forward. The Bureau of Engineering would support, whatever decision that the council wants to make on this.
Just think as I understood earlier, we're going to amend it so that we would waive the entire fee for this purpose?
Yes, the motion as written is saying take a look at the policy under a specific condition of the policy, and then, which would be a 50% waiver of the fees. I would like to just clarify, I think that the city attorney should take a look at the policy to see if it indeed applies to this project, because it may be appropriate to waive 100% of the fees for this.
Which is certainly my intention as the author of this, to have that amendment so that we can waive 100% of the fees. And maybe I ought to, for those of you who aren't familiar, give you to add on to what the city engineer is saying. Our well-to-do neighbor to the west, who has this road improvement that they're doing a great job on, has generously basically offered to connect that road to the city of LA, but a portion of that connection is LA, the city of LA. So they said, we'll just do it for you for free. Our costs, use your engineers and put a retaining wall, make a nice road so that there's not this gap of a broken road and everything else. We wanted to just accept that outright and say, that's thank you, which is really what we should say as a city, is just thank you, we'll take the road. But nothing is that easy in bureaucratic world, and even meeting with the engineers and everything, we have to have our people go out there and do the appropriate checks, and even though they have engineers doing exactly the same thing who are certified to do that, we have to do it from the LA perspective. Originally, the city of LA was saying, well, we're going to actually charge you money to give us something. And so the idea here is to say, let's not charge them money because we're forcing ourselves to have to check it. Let's just waive that and accept this generous gift, fixing a street that in LA that we wouldn't have the money to fix otherwise. That's an important artery between the two cities.
So since the upshot of this motion is calling upon the CAO and the CLA to make a determination of whether the subsidy is consistent with policy, then if I'm understanding your suggestion, maybe we should just simply include a city attorney recommendation as well as to whether it's a CAO, CLA, and city attorney determination of its eligibility. And if it is, maybe it's more than 50%. The motion says 50%, but maybe it should be 50 or 100%.
Yeah, I mean, I think it should be 100%. I don't see how we can charge them for a fellow city. This is not a private entity. This is a public entity that's going to do a public improvement to the same standards that we operate under. In fact, they actually do it slightly higher than we, but to our standards. So I push for the 100% and have the city attorney bless it. But I mean, that's where we should be heading on this.
Mr. Kretz.
I'm not entirely sure why we're undertaking the expense that we're talking about subsidizing anyway, which I think we should. And if we go forward with this, it should be 100%. But the city of Calabasas admittedly is doing this to a higher standard than we would. Why do we also have to review it when it's being done by a fellow city that is capable of doing it and capable of assessing it and capable of inspecting it? Why do we have to double cover the same thing?
That's that very question with the city attorney.
Well, it's very standard. We do a lot of work with Caltrans and Culver City, other cities, and it's very typical that the agency, we look at it and we review it. Granted, it should be much less time consuming because it's been properly engineered, but we do look at it, and our inspectors do need to also verify that the work is done. So it's more of that's the practice that we have followed.
And ultimately, sir, if something were to occur on that stretch of road, it's not Calabasas that's going to be liable for that. It's going to be the city of Los Angeles, most likely.
And, the fee policy casts a very wide net. And this clarification will be very helpful to the Bureau of Engineering because it's likely that we will see other cities where we are doing strictly public works improvement, public infrastructure, no private, no for-profit. And I think that would be a good determination to have for use in the future.
Especially if they're giving us something.
That's, $200,000 worth of improvements to the road. And they're just asking us to waive the fee. I have a sort of a suggested wording for that recommendation.
Okay.
That the city attorney advised the CAO and the CLA on the applicability of the development fee subsidy policy to this City of Calabasas project, specifically the betterments within the City of Los Angeles, and determine if the policy applies.
Mr. Blumenfield, does that work for you?
Yeah, or determining if the policy applies, or maybe, I don't know exact word, but determining if fees can be appropriately waived,
right.
just so they know what our goal is and what they're determining.
If the determination is that it applies, then I think the worst case would be a 50% fee waiver. I believe they'll find that it would apply to the policy, and so the ideal is 100%. I think the secondary is a 50% waiver based on that.
To ask if 100% waiver can apply, I guess is we're mincing words, but I mean, I want them to know that our goal is just to get the city attorney to see if 100% waiver can apply.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's, if the policy doesn't apply, then the city council can choose to waive 0 to 100% of the fee. So.
Okay.
Which I hope would be the end result of this, regardless.
I think everybody seems interested in achieving that result. It's a question of how we do it in a way that is, still protects the city from potential liability and so forth.
Okay. Karen Kalfine with this.
Wait, Ms. Kalfine.
I was just going to say, rather than shoehorn it in, we could simply just waive the policy in this particular case.
And you've asked us to report so we can look at all these different things and get something back to you with the CAO and see what the options are that you have. And one of them could be waiving a policy, or if it doesn't apply. I think we understand where you want to head with this, so we can look at the options.
Yeah. So approve the motion, but with the additional recommendations that were included in that language to have the city attorney advise as to the applicability of the policy and the eligibility of in this circumstances for the fee subsidy, and the consideration of whether the subsidy should be 50% or possibly higher as well. Okay? So any concerns about that? Okay, with that objection, that will be the recommendation of the committee. Is that clear enough?
Yes.
All right, thank you very much. That brings us to item number 6.
Item number 6, continue from October 28, 2013, is Office of Finance and City Administrative Officer reports and City Attorney to report relative to a specific fee requirement codified within the legislative language of Senate Bill 1186 Steinberg.
Good
Ms. Maeda,
afternoon.
good afternoon.
Emily Maeda with the Office of the CAO. During the discussion on October 28th, the committee requested options for funding the $1 fee in lieu of implementing it. Based on 460,000 licensed businesses, a maximum of $138,000 per year is owed to the state. The cost for 2013 and 2014 is estimated to be $276,000. This office has identified the unappropriated balance or the reserve fund as source of funds to pay that. However, it is our recommendation that the fee be implemented.
Okay. Anything further?
We're Ed Cabrera, Office of Finance. As we indicated in our report back in October, our office was seeking direction and guidance from the council and this committee in terms of the best method to move forward with regards to implementation of SB 1186. And again, being sensitive to the business-friendly direction, certainly we wanted to receive the guidance given the fact that a significant number of our businesses that are registered pay no tax, and they would now be subject to paying the $1 fee, even though they wouldn't normally have a obligation to remit any payment because they may be exempt either through small business exemption, new business exemption, or exempt as a nonprofit entity.
So this was an important piece of legislation with, in my view, one dumb clause. It is designed to address a very significant problem of abusive threats against businesses for failure to comply with the ADA. And Senator Steinberg and others, Senator Dutton and others, tried to take on that big issue of trying to deal with that. And almost as a throwaway in this bill, they said, oh, and in addition, cities are going to charge $1 to all their businesses, and part of that money is going to come to the state, and part's going to stay in the city and be used to train additional certified, what's the acronym stand for? Anyway,
Certified Access Specialists.
Thank you. I've read the analysis, the Senate analysis of this bill. I don't think anybody gave a lot of thought to what impact that would have on local government, how local governments implement this in light of the fact that many local governments don't have business taxes. Many have different schemes for business licensure, and it's going to apply inequitably across the state. They didn't give any thought to whether or not this is essentially mandating local governments to impose an illegal tax that under Prop 26 that might not even be permissible. So I just think this is a mess. This particular clause is a mess. As I see it, there's no particular enforcement mechanism on this either. And I'm going to throw out the idea, and I'd love to hear further discussion from members because we did discuss this when it was here before. But my thinking on this is we simply don't charge the tax and we don't pay the tax, and we allow the state to come in with whatever enforcement process it sees fit to come in to collect our $180,000 or whatever tiny amount of money it is. And when they do that, then at that time we can define what it is really that they want us to do, who they want us to collect it against, and so forth.
Are we required to be the ones collecting it, or is the state?
Yes. No, we are ordered by the state to impose a $1 fee on every business license or similar, what's the language?
Similar.
What is it?
Instrument.
Yeah, so
Is there not some automated way to do it when we already collect that money?
yeah, well, but the problem is there are many businesses that are licensed in the city that aren't paying any business tax because they're exempt, because they're below the limit or whatever. So we have an option of sending them a bill for $1,
Our bank
which
fee-
will
Great idea.
cost us more than it will collect to send out that mailing. It's just an absurd, silly imposition by Sacramento upon how we do things here. Mr.
Yeah,
England.
and I think there are a lot of other cities, quite frankly, particularly the ones that don't have a business tax at all.
Yeah.
And that you can renew your business license online with no fee. That
Yeah.
those are issues. I would support that, but I would add to it, if we could, that we also immediately draw up a resolution asking for a legislative fix. And so when this comes to council, that we also introduce a resolution that, while we think it's good in nature and the intent was good, and the idea logistically and what this creates in terms of an unfunded mandate and burden on all California cities, but particularly in Los Angeles as well, because of our sheer size and the fact that we do have exempt status for many businesses and nonprofits that do have a business license. It doesn't address those. And we draw those up as a resolution asking for a legislative fix.
I'll be happy to do that and shop for an author, actually, as well. So,
You know anyone?
any other thoughts on this, or does that seem like a...
Is there a way we get some sort of clarity from the courts? In addition, I mean, obviously, the legislative solution would be the best, but we might be able to get some sort of legal opinion. Or,
Any chance of a declaratory relief action or anything like that, or does that make sense? I see members of the city.
What I want to know is what are those crazy people in Sacramento thinking?
I'm telling you.
Good afternoon, Beverly Cook, City Attorney's
You did.
Office. We actually struggled with this particular matter about a year or so ago, and a number of California cities joined with the League of Cities. We went to the Senate Office of Research, trying to get clarification on a number of issues, such as the scope of the permits. Did it make sense to ask the folks who administered the business tax license to impose this $1 fee, since it would include exempt businesses as well as businesses where people worked out of their homes and therefore weren't even in the city, and yet we were imposing that $1 fee. We didn't get a lot of good answers. Actually, we didn't get many at all. And what we did was we attempted to look at what other jurisdictions have done, and there's a long list of cities that attempted to figure out, working together, what to do with this. And what they have done in general is imposed the $1 fee on all businesses, whether they're exempt or not. And what they have also done is attempted, only remitted, because I believe if you look at the direction regarding remittances, you only remit a portion of that which is collected, so it's not on the total tax base. And it specifically attempted to eliminate other types of permits by looking at language that said the issuance of a business license or equivalent instrument. So they attempted to make it as broad as possible to include even those businesses that were exempt. So we would probably be one of the few jurisdictions that did not attempt to collect it at all. because others have. If you look, you see City of Pasadena, Stockton, Oakland, San Diego, Monrovia, you just go down the list, and most folks are attempting to collect the $1 fee. And it's state mandated, so it's not the City of LA imposing the fee on the tax base. It would be the state. It's state mandated. There are no provisions for enforcement, and since it's state mandated, we don't have the local ability to enforce it, first of all. And to answer your question, one of the things that we considered from the last meeting was whether or not there would be a basis for litigation. Since the city is in the position of having to collect it but not pay it, the question is one of standing. Do we have standing to challenge the state under these circumstances? I believe the most that we could argue is whether or not it's costing us more to collect than what we are being reimbursed with the 5% administrative fee.
How about the fact that it may be deemed contrary to our interests in economic development and business attraction?
You know,
to do so much with business tax reform, and now we're going to increase essentially the real business tax burden, even if it's by $1.
I certainly understand that argument, but one of the things, if you take a look at the portion of the bill that they paid a great deal of attention to, they're trying to protect small businesses.
Right.
They're trying to protect them from the folks who continually sue over ADA compliance issues. They will file in small claims court and demand $2,500, settle for something in that dollar amount, and so they are in some respects trying to protect the small businesses as opposed to trying to run them out. Will this dollar fee do that? That's the other side of the coin, but their goal and their focus was to protect small businesses, and the majority of this legislation is directed towards trying to protect them from unscrupulous folks.
I get that, but I don't think what Sacramento was trying to do has anything to do with whether we have an actual controversy. Right. Our actual controversy is that we have a policy interest in attracting businesses and helping the businesses that are here. And
certainly.
We're having an imposed mandate now that to some extent is contrary to that.
Right.
So, I mean, in fact, the California Chamber of Commerce and many others supported this bill, to my surprise. But that being the case, and you're right, the reason is because 99% of the import of the bill is actually intended to be protective of businesses that would otherwise have to pay, ransom essentially to some of these abusers of the ADA.
And ironically, or not, this part is the part that was dedicated to trying to educate people, and sort of was the part that was for the handicapped and the handicap advocates.
Yeah.
That's what this part was about, and the other part was really for the business interests.
So now I understand that by the way, the discussions that you had, the city representatives were participating with the League of Cities during the actual pendency of this legislation?
No, unfortunately, it was after the fact. It was because I believe the bill passed in September of 2012, and the discussions occurred after that.
Okay.
So there was some of the discussions did occur like with questions, but in terms of the League of Cities being involved, it was after the fact.
Okay. I was a little concerned by the fact that this bill was signed into law over a year ago,
yeah.
And we're just now dealing with this while we're pressing up against print deadlines and so on. But I think the reason for that is the same reason the League didn't get engaged. It was under the rate. This is one small part of a very big bill, and
right.
Just nobody picked up on it.
Yeah, I'm not even sure that the $1 fee was a part of the original bill. I appeared that it was just added on at the last minute and then signed into law.
There's another part of the bill that mandates that cities inform their businesses about their obligations
That's
under
correct.
the ADA as well.
If I may, Chair, Ed Cabrera, Office of Finance, when we became aware of the bill after it had passed, because as Ms. Cook, she is correct, we weren't aware of this bill. We weren't notified regarding the pending legislation. Once we became aware of it, it was past our print deadline for 2013 renewal season. However, what we did, we were able to make changes, and we did provide the notification. So that aspect of the legislation has been fulfilled. We did implement the changes in the language to any of our notices regarding the state disability access and the various points of contact. So that was able to be implemented, and we have that draft language again in our current mock-ups for the 2014 renewal season.
Oh, okay. Okay, good.
I bet you that was put in there because it probably came back and someone said this is an unfunded mandate and it won't pass. So they put the dollar in there so that it would be a funded mandate. And that's why they're piecing it together. They did it that way.
In reality, it is an unfunded mandate because we'll actually lose money on it.
It's an unfunded mandate.
Masquerading as a funded mandate.
Masquerading as a funded mandate, but without the dollar fee, then they're just telling us to do this education kind of thing, and we would be able to spit it back and say we're not going to do it because it's not a funded mandate.
And the state gets the credit for doing all the business-friendly stuff, and we're the ones with the return address on the envelope that has a stupid $1 fee.
More or less.
Nice.
So, any thoughts or recommendations?
I would recommend that the $1 fee be addressed to them at the state, so we don't actually have to collect it.
I don't know.
Send it to an address there as our collection
What's
effort.
the total amount, I mean, that the dollar fee adds up to?
There are 460,000 registered businesses.
460,000, and then we have to remit 30% of that
That's correct.
to this. I mean, you know, is there a way to do like the functional equivalent and not bother to that and just write a check for the 30% of?
Yeah, and that's what a lot of cities have done. They just eat it. And that's what Ms. Maeda was saying. We would have the ability to just absorb that in, the reserve or whatever. We'll find a way to absorb that much money if we decide to do it that way. I mean, another option would be let them come and collect it.
Right.
I think the policy issue we try to raise is that at what point does, this year could be $1, next year they could increase it to $2 or $3. At what point do we say, it's not something we could just absorb, it's something that we need to actually collect.
And if we are going to absorb it, maybe we should just absorb it as a credit against the mandate claims that we have outstanding with Sacramento right now. Mr. Englander.
Some of our old gas tax money back. If we could, Mr. Chair, I would support your motion to not pay this at this time. And then if we could also add to that again, when is this scheduled to come to council?
Wednesday.
Wednesday? Maybe we can hold it off in council. It would be nice to hold it in council for a week and submit a resolution again at the same time, perhaps get that waived through committee so they come together. So we're not just throwing our thumb up in the air at the state and or the idea behind this, just the collection method, and that ask if you could work with my office, perhaps in the CLAs, we can draft a motion, a resolution, asking for legislative clarity and a fix for this, and we can explain in detail some of the issues, and if you can work through my office and working with the CLA, we could prepare that resolution, and then it would be nice for them to come together.
I'll support
as a
that.
package, if you guys are okay with that.
I am.
Sounds good.
Add the drafting of a recommendation for a legislative fix.
Correct.
We can do that, but we still have to act, I think, on instructing. I guess we don't really need to act. This is a report. Finance is looking for guidance from us on what to do, and I think what to do is send out the ordinary invoices that you normally would for the ordinary business tax, as usual, without change, and, so be it. And then
And then what do we say about the declaratory relief? Is there any way to seek that through the courts, or is that?
it sounded like the city attorney would not recommend that.
Right. As I said, I believe we don't have standing to go into court to seek any clarification because it's not imposed on us. It's imposed on the businesses themselves. Our only function is to collect a state-mandated fee.
Although we have 5% Don't we have administrative cost?
There is, right, I guess if we could contend that it's going to cost us more than that, we'd have to be able to seek clarification and/or show some damages there, and that would be the only basis for damages, that it would cost us in excess overall more than the 5% that we would recover.
And you don't think that's too weak to stand on to get any sort of relief?
I do, but...
Okay.
All right. Anything further? Members? Are you clear on where we're going with this?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Nope.
All right. That brings us to the conclusion of our agenda, and we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.